Hello, welcome to the demo of Securonix SIEM and BitLyft SOC. I'm going to be your host today. My name is Nick Pidek with BitLyft Cybersecurity. I am the CMO here. We're excited to have you join us today. I'm excited about this webinar for a couple reasons. One, we've got our director of SOC with us, Mike Skeeth here. I've been on many demos with him on client calls, prospect calls. And I'm always fascinated about learning new things with this tool and what the SOC team is doing. And oftentimes you hear a lot of marketing fluff, which Mike does not do. He just talks straight to the heart of the matter. So I'm excited to get his perspective and his voice here. So a quick couple of housekeeping items as we get started. If you're just joining or joining at any time, you can go ahead and put any question you have throughout this webinar and demo right in the chat feature, right through the platform here. If it's something that Mike or myself are talking about right then and there, we can see that come in. We'll also have a dedicated time of Q&A at the end of the demo and webinar. We can ask any specific questions or follow up. And then, of course, if you need to reach out to us, we're available at bitlyft.com. You can connect with myself or Mike as well. There's also 2 poll questions available for you to take that helps us. One of them is just talking about what are you most interested in seeing here. The second one is helping us identify what are the pain points, what becomes top of mind for you in your cybersecurity challenges to have handled. So with that quick little bit, if you don't know who BitLyft is, we're a cybersecurity company, and our vision is to illuminate and eliminate cyber threats for a safer world. You can view us as a managed cybersecurity as a service. We do 24/7 monitoring detection with instant threat remediation. We'll talk a little bit about that. You get a dedicated expert level security team led by Mike here. We help companies of all size meet their compliance and reporting needs through audit logs. And we're really scalable to fit small and medium-sized enterprises. So with that, Mike has got a great background in cybersecurity. He's been leading our team here. He's a really, as I said, an innovative thinker. He cuts right to the heart of the matter and has got a great perspective on security. He sees into a lot of different environments. I think this is one of the unique advantages of our team is it's not just one organization. They're not just living in a single silo. They're seeing a lot of environments. They're seeing a lot of challenges, a lot of similarities, a lot of unique things. And that experience that he's helping lead really codifies into his team knowledge. And that's something that he gets to bring to any conversation or anything, any environment that he's helping protect. So I'll kick it over to him here in just a minute. But just what we're going to cover today, where you're going to see the basics of the Securonix tool. And Mike's going to walk us through investigating a phishing attempt, account compromise, mailbox configuration. We're going to show some threats that were discovered through UBA, which is one of the unique components of Securonix. And let me just say, like, we're not even going to barely scratch the surface today. You may have noticed that this is part 1. It could go on, but the gist of this is just to get your feet wet into the Securonix tool, see a little bit about how Mike and the team go about identifying these components. If you're looking at other tools, you're looking at, hey, what is the security team at BitLyft doing to help protect environments? You'll get a little bit of that today. There's always so much to talk about. I'll try to keep Mike down to the 45 minutes so that we can make sure we have time to answer your questions. And then we'll talk about what the unique component of the Securonix tool in conjunction with our platform through SOAR and threat intelligence, how we take what the Securonix tool is doing, leveraging that advanced technology, integrated into our platform for automation, and then what we call our CTI, our threat intelligence, that helps just make it more accurate, gives Mike and the team a little bit more information and context and validated threat intel into these environments across all of our clients. And then we'll have a time for Q&A. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Mike. Mike, this is your show, so you could pull up the dashboard and walk us through. And we're excited to have you here, Mike.
All right, welcome everybody. So if you're familiar with the tool, or if you're not, this is the first screen that you're presented with that filters on the top data and visibility into the whole system. There's different places to drill down in deeper if we're doing just off-the-cuff threat hunting, or other investigative needs, other places where we're actually setting the tool up and configuring it for whitelisting and blacklisting. But overall, this is the main dashboard to see who are my people that are causing me the most pain or most threat landscape, and what are those violations and or threats. So in this demo, we're just going to walk through, like Nick said, a couple of use cases and keep it pointed at those. So the first one we're looking at is a phishing attempt. And so under the top threats, I'm just going to filter for one of the threats that is potential account compromised by phishing. So as we drill into this, we can see our main cause for concern here. The one person that created this is Brian Taylor. And it's always important to note that there's multiple ways to get to this exact data. I could have got to it through the violators tab, and if Brian was somebody that I had a concern with, I could have seen his activity from there. But in this case, we're going straight to the phishing issue. So from here, it just tells me who's the problem child, who's the people that I'm concerned with, and who triggered this event. So I choose him and drill down into the next level. And now I can get into the threat model. How did this become a threat? How did it escalate to that level? And I can see that there was a potential phishing attempt detected. And then on the endpoint, there was an execution of a bad process. And then also through a next-gen firewall, we see traffic generated through to a randomly generated domain. So all of these pieces get taken from a BitLyft perspective at how would we address each one, because we would never want it to get all the way to stage 3 communication. So what would we have in play here? And one of the first things is obviously a good phishing campaign. So teaching and coaching and filtering out things that we know are in the phishing campaign world. And a lot of that has to be done at the solution level. The SIEM is great at detecting these and triggering on these, but the filtering and the blocking and the stopping has to happen somewhere else. So that would be the potential phishing attempt detected. But from this screen too, we can drill down into the different specific violations here. If I was back at the other screen, they would all show up. Those individual ones are all in this violation tab as well. So multiple violations created a threat. The threat hit the SOC and said, hey, this is urgent. We need to take action here. So we also see a timeline on this. It kind of gives the full perspective of what happened through this threat model. We have the delivery stage, and then an hour and a half later, we had execution of a bad process. So whether that took longer because of the email dropper, or it dwelled before the log was generated. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it took an hour and a half to get to this stage, and then 33 more minutes for the communication. Generally, we see these happen a lot quicker, so the time frame would be a lot smaller. But again, we'll drill down into the violation here, and it gives us more insight into this user, this activity. What was the email? Where was it? Source and destination IP address. And throughout this process too, we can think of other ways we would have triggered on this. If that source address was already a known bad address, we would have had it in a list that the whole SIEM is interacting with to trigger on before the email ever came. Just the fact that other activity was happening from that IP would have given us cause for concern.
Mike, does this oftentimes, help you inform the client or inform other people about, their inline filtering because you're seeing this? Like, what kind of information are you able with this visibility to give back to people?
Yes. So one of the first things we would talk with the client about is, do you normally have .dox subjects going to people? Is that a normal function of your business? For some of them it is, and for some of them it absolutely is not. And so doing inline filters in your mail solution, this one specifically I believe is O365. So you would have inline filters to say, block these or trigger these as additional need for review before they can be passed on to the inbox through that solution. To limit the surface, limit the attack vector that the attackers have against you. Most times you wouldn't put that always in the subject, but this is what we do see as a normal subject that comes from the attacker. So blocking that straight away would help here a lot. And then as much information as possible, because when we talk with our clients, we're coming at them with an issue that 2 seconds ago they knew nothing about. So we need to have as much background, as much information as possible so that we can have a conversation about it and not leave any stone unturned, if you will, or have all the information available for them.
That's great. And beyond just the inline filtering, also because it's talking about the endpoint there in the second stage and then firewall, you're also able to give that sort of contexted visibility as well.
Yes, so this would come from a different log source, obviously, that would be on the endpoint, whether it be a event viewer logger or an EDR product that is pulling this information. And that would be where the blocker is. So what we'd be talking about next is, what solution are you using as an EDR in this company, and what would be successful next steps to make sure that this type of an attack just isn't even on the table, right? Providing a good EDR eliminates a lot of the need for some of these to even execute, or the ability for them to become an issue. And then furthermore into the firewall, as our system interacts with this, knowing that there was a bad IP and a randomly generated domain, all these pieces can go right back to the firewall immediately upon this visibility or visibility across the spectrum of the BitLyft clientele. So we're sharing this metadata, we're sharing this threat intel that happens in the wild and culminating into everyone's devices. So the firewall would go out, get the new list programmatically, and have this all ready to be blocked if it wasn't already.
That's great, and that's an example of utilizing an additional component with the Securonix SIEM tool to create proactive protection, right?
Correct. And to answer the question of more information, we can dive into the actual violation events. So this is where we get more into the full log message. As an analyst, we're always looking for the raw details to make sure that we have the full picture, and we get it from this view, this page, where we can see, what else happened through that log message. Gives me more information too about the user. So I see, even what department they're in. Is this an email that they should have opened? Is it something that we need to take back to a phishing campaign, phishing awareness, to help them understand that better, that this types of attacks should be removed, just from their own use of the email tools that they have.
That's great. Yeah, could you show us an example of an account compromise? We talked about user Donnie Chun.
So for this one, I'm just going to filter on Donnie, so we can see everything he's been up to. And we see all of these different types of issues from his account. And it's also good to know that in this solution, every activity goes back to an account because somebody had to be logged in, even if it is a machine compromise, there's still a username that it's going to be attributed to. There's still a host name that's going to come through the system. So when we're thinking about user activity or system activity, it still will have a user identity. So even if Donnie didn't do it, his account did on that machine. So that's just a good note to take too. So here in this data exfiltration due to a possible cloud account takeover, and these seem overly complicated to patch all these things together through a threat model. But when we break it down, it's pretty simple of if there was no protection at all in your environment, this is what we would see through the full process. And we have a potential phishing email from a type squatting domain. So the system is helping to identify that the domain is actually a spoof. And here's where me as an analyst, I gloss over this. It's something that I really need a system to help me with, but we can see keopp.com and the email is koeopp.com. So at a quick glance, I would not notice this. I have other people on my team that definitely would notice this. They're, visually, we just see things differently. But I really need a system to check me, to have my back, to make sure that none of this stuff where my eyes will lie to me for a minute can get through. So the system's looking at this. The system is saying it's a type squatted domain amongst other types of DNS spoofing, twisting of the client's environments. And then from there, we also quickly see a login from a rare geolocation compared to past behavior. So it's actually looking at long-term and saying this is not normal for this user. There's a couple different use cases here. It could also be an impossible travel, but in this case, it was just rare due to past behavior. We would have to have 2 logins right back to back to have an impossible travel. So this goes another step farther and says, this user has never came from India before. Now we have a problem. And then forwarding rules configured for a mailbox. The forwarding rule is configured. Sometimes these are very specific and known as bad. Other times they're a little bit more cunning. So we can have immediate action on some forwarding rules and a review of others. But we know for the most part what the attacker uses, that we can get a lot of coverage by just having a rule that automatically blocks this account if we see certain forwarding rules. And then there's a spike in emailed forwarding because they took over the account and now they are spamming some other university, some other company, some other people pretending to be Donnie, pretending to be a trusted person from this company. In this threat model, the time frame is very long. Again, this would be an example of a very targeted attack that was spending a lot of time trying to compromise this company. Generally, we wouldn't see that end with just an email campaign out from them. That would be more in line with where ransomware would come from. So 62 days to execution, we see this happen immediately. So if an account gets taken over, we see within hours that it's sending, the forwarding rule happens, and then they're immediately sending mail. It generally isn't days and hours here.
Mike, how would you go about remediating this issue from the account compromise?
So as soon as we see that the account is compromised from any one of these, this violation of rare geolocation, and we determine that that's bad, if the forwarding rule is determined that that's bad, we would reach out to the, however the organization has mail set up. So it gets very intricate at this point, but we reset the user account, we log all of the user sessions out, because a lot of these solutions, even if you reset the password, anyone that's connected at that time is still able to connect. So we terminate all the sessions, and then alert the client that this happened to this user, so expect them to be getting a hold of help desk. Or, depending on the organization, they may be reaching out separately to that user to get their account in good standing again. There's also a time in there where we're talking with the client and asking if anything else in the inbox is suspicious, because at that point, you could do some other forensics on the inbox, on the account, to make sure that there isn't anything else happening or had happened. Checking for additional forwarding rules, for instance, or a transfer of other files.
That's great. Could you dive into a little bit about the UBA component and how that's unique within the Securonix tool, and how that gives us some visibility that we might not have otherwise?
So yeah, and part of this alert has a lot of UBA in it. So a potential phishing email from a type squatted domain, that's very specific. When we get into the login from rare geolocation compared to past behavior, that's where we get into the UEBA, the user behavior analytics. The forwarding rule can be very specific, and the spike in email can be specific, but can also be triggered on against past behavior of that user. And what it's also looking at, if I come up and look at my user list, is all of these on the left-hand side are departments that people are categorized against. So as we bring in 80, we bring in the departments of people, and it matches them up to groups that we should see similar activities in. So it's not only looking at the user specifically and their patterns of activity, but it's also looking at their peers. So we're able to distinguish what the log source is telling us based on the user behavior.
And could you provide some context? How is that different than other tools in the space here?
So what we've experienced is other tools tend to rely on list functionalities or SOC documents and spreadsheets that are shared through the SOC team to keep an eye on potential issues, potential people of concern. When we see a list function like this, and we go back to Donnie here and we say, a lot's happening. We've reset the account. Now let's put this person in a a list, we can quickly add them to a watch list to add even more context to UEBA. So through these policies, through these events, it gives us a quicker uplift where people don't have to manage these things, because it quickly, especially when managing multiple customers, it quickly gets overwhelming for people to have to remember, when did we add these people? How long have we had them in here? When were we supposed to remove them from this list? It's all automated in this system. So we can quickly add, remove, and escalate based on user behavior.
That's great. Could you talk a little bit more about CTI and that in that same vein, right? So updating of the list, and talk a little bit about the context and the validation of what we're doing behind the scenes here with the tool to provide additional context that can, and even if you want to get into how we can actually, through the endpoint, if the appropriate devices in place, actually push that solution, push that threat directly for proactive protection?
So CTI generates, for lack of a better term, lists against IPs and domains and hashes and email addresses and URLs that have been seen performing bad activity. And we place those in every location that they are functional for. So in the SIEM space, in the actual Securonix SIEM, we have a lot of third-party intelligence is where they go, and they end up looking like this. So these are what you would consider all open source, and they're full of false data. So BitLyft CTI takes a lot of these that do exist, and they do have good data in them. It's just if we trust one of these, it's going to give us bad intel. So we take that, put it into CTI, provide one list for IPs, one list for domains, one list for emails that we know are performing bad activity. That gives us the ability to do continued investigation on those to make sure that if they stay on the list, it's because they remain bad. And if they are released back to the public, in case of IPs are released regularly, then we're keeping that list as clean as possible, and continuing to check on those threat metadata pieces. When we're looking at the data types, and here's a list of data types in this demo environment and all the different log sources. Each log source is going to take a certain metadata field that's going to be helpful to it, whether it be mail that's looking at incoming email addresses, and we have a list of bad email addresses that we can trigger on, or if it's your firewall that's obviously looking at IP addresses, domains, your EDR product is looking at hashes. Those are lists that we also supplement into the system and into those where they work and where they fit. So today we can put IP addresses on your firewall that sync up as quick as possible with that solution. And that's dependent on the next gen firewall functionality, but generally 5 to 20 minutes, it's refreshing that list and pulling in the new IPs from across our whole CTI infrastructure.
Yeah, that's great. Could you walk us through, I know this being a dev environment, but what are some other, common threats, or even if you want to get into kind of like the loose threat hunting you and the team would normally take here from the dashboard to drill down and identify threats, or to go through that process?
So one thing we like to focus on here is that our team and this solution is pinned on the MITRE ATT&CK framework and the kill chain analysis to show where in that kill chain these things live. And as we saw through those examples, a threat may be multiple of them, but we don't always need multiple or a full threat to create the need to account reset. So when you see this kill chain analysis and we see recon stage, delivery stage, exploit stage, a attack could come in different places in here. It doesn't have to start in the recon stage. So they can be anywhere through here. To get that beautiful full kill chain analysis MITRE attack breach, that's generally what's shown is, look, there was a recon, there was a delivery, there was an exploit, there was an execution, and then an exfiltration. But anywhere in here, we can see threats that would need to be blocked. And what my goal is in the SOC is to continue to build this out so that we're able to take this framework here and make sure we have an attack, a blocker, a remediation for every single one of these steps that can come in. And if you're not familiar with it, this is a great resource, a great tool. Pretty much every attack that exists fits on this page. Every new attack that's going to come next year still fits on this page. The old adage of there's nothing new under the sun has been developed here, and it's pretty fully featured of every place that attacks can come from. And they do make modifications, obviously, and they update it regularly.
Yeah, that's good. We had a question come in right when you were showing that, Mike. One of the questions was, does the framework or frameworks integrated, and does it get updated when there are changes? For instance, if there's a 0-day vulnerability in a system, does the MITRE attack framework get updated automatically, or how do the updates work?
So that 0-day is still functioning on the same way. Just because there's a new hole in a software package, it's still the exploit stage, right? It's still falling under that. So what we do in the case of 0 days is, obviously we're looking for EDR usually to come and assist with that. We're doing patching or alerting that patching needs to be done. We're helping get the word out that updates and patches and EDR solutions need to be in place, right? The next stage of that is identifying, and this is what it takes a little bit longer usually. 0 days come out. We saw a couple very recently that came out. It takes 3 to 4 days to start to get some metadata. What is that? With CTI, we don't need to go back and build new functionality into the SIEM. 90% of the time, we need to add data to CTI that goes and blocks it immediately. And that's really the core of that system and why we initially built it, so that our team didn't have to go log into 150 different devices and systems and add these things manually. It goes and it populates immediately.
Yeah, that's great. And something else, just along that vein with, competent attacks, I know this has come up as questions quite often that you've answered as well in other meetings we've had, Mike. But could you talk through like the SolarWinds attack? And, that's been, obviously these things hit the news. People ask the questions like, hey, what's happening in my environment? How am I protected? Could you walk us through, like, you could use SolarWinds as an example. What does that process look like from a security perspective and consulting and working with organizations, and specifically from a SIEM level?
Yeah, and that is a very good use case for what I just said, but I'll go into a little more detail there. As soon as SolarWinds came out and people were engaged in groups and communication of what do we do next, the first thing was go look for things that are odd, because nobody knows. And it took a few days to come out with the updates to systems and updates to identify those. So like a tenable vulnerability scanner took about 4 or 5 days to actually have a way to scan that server for this malicious activity. The SIEM vendors went to work building out new violation policies. But what those violation policies was basically new triggers on that threat intel, that threat metadata, the IP addresses, the domains that they were going to. So BitLyft only had to add that to CTI. We didn't have to go in and reconfigure rules and build new rules. And that was some of the questions we had when a SIEM vendor provided correspondence online that said, hey, we built these new violations. You can go and import them into your tool. The client would come to us and say, have you done this? What are you doing about it? What's happening? And we just say, no, we already stopped that threat. And we did it without having to take time and log in and set up and make sure functionality was working. That sometimes takes a while when you're testing and validating new violation policies.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for that context, Mike. So even going back to some of the other functionality within this tool that's pretty common that you use, maybe if you want to dive into the reporting or even get into the whitelist, blacklist, what are some other features and functionality here that you use pretty often in the SOC that other people could see the security benefit from?
So as we are delving into just the threat hunting that you asked about a minute ago, or just additional context, right from this screen, there's maybe a specific question that somebody's asking. There's something that we're looking for internally that we're just trying to validate. And then I decide that, I really need to send something to my contacts at the client. As you can see, I can very quickly, all of this data, I can very quickly get what are the device event categories? What are the pieces? All this log data, there's 3,746 records here or logs here, and I can quickly pull out the different pieces of metadata that they all have. And then as I refine my search, I can simply export these results as a report. And it's that simple. That's generally where reporting is needed, is how do I get the information into your hands as quick as possible? And then, of course, we have just general reports that we're sending out regularly based on specific needs. So those same spotter reports, we can build out custom ones that send out daily. And then just some overall SOC, how many violations have went off in my environment, how often am I seeing this user, or what are my top violating users? Those kind of things go out through general reports as well.
And that ties into the use cases. We see this in the space, as well as the compliance challenges, whether it's CMMC, and I know that's still in process, GLBA within higher ed, or the financial services. Could you talk a little bit about, and I know those are unique per client, but could you talk about how to bridge that gap of getting the right information? Of course, if the logs are being sent to us, first of all, could you walk us through the compliance component, how that relates to reporting?
Yeah, so the one difference here too, that reports, dashboards, threat hunting, intelligence, all comes from the exact same source. So whether I am building one of these dashboards for a client, and I think I can edit, so all of these come with the same syntax that gets added, and I would write it out up here. I would just paste one of my searches up here to generate this dashboard for somebody. and it's the exact same syntax that's here. So I can drill down, I can pivot around, I can pull out that data from those log sources or user identities, and build it out, completely define what we're needing to review on, and then I copy and paste it into those, whether it's a report or whether it's the data insights dashboards. It's the same across the board. So I don't have to spend time in other systems writing a query syntax over here that's different in the other place. And so when you're looking at compliance and you're looking at, I need to report on X users doing A, B, and C. It's just a query string. And it's going to be based on log sources or based on user data, either across the board through the whole client environment or specifically against, those the firewall or the endpoint monitoring or specific users even.
That's great, and we're coming up on 41 minutes here. So if you're watching and you have a question, go ahead and throw it into that chat feature here. But Mike, something I wanted to ask you is there, and I know you love these kinds of questions because you're always like, everyone is different, but are there any like aha moments, where someone who's not used this tool before, we put this in their environment? Could you share something of like an aha moment that people get? Like, what is it that it creates that awareness in their mind? Do you have any cool aha moments you could share? And I know I'm making you think, putting you on the spot.
You are. So for me, this is the most important thing, is I need to see how fast they had to go to make this threat happen. No, I'm totally kidding. I use this as a joke because I think it's cute. It's neat insight, but it doesn't matter, right? It's an impossible travel. We need to kill it. No, the biggest feedback that we've gotten is the searchability makes sense and it's standardized across the whole platform. When I'm looking at a specific log source and I'm trying to figure out what happened, who did what, or just ops specific things, because BitLyft continues to build and work on the security side of things, but the tool has so much uses for ops that clients want to come in, they want to use the dashboard, they want to see, why do I have all these, this user account keeps failing on this host, why? And generally, it can't get all the way down to the exact process that's causing that, but it can get them down to what host it is. So now I can go and figure it out without having to say, my user keeps saying they're getting locked out, and we don't see anything wrong with their account. Their password was just changed again. What's happening? And that's a pretty simple use case that we see, but it's the ability to easily add. So I don't even have to write things out. I can just add them, add to search, and it pulls that out. This type of usability just makes sense and makes it easier to jump into.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to ask, so you're saying that this is providing visibility across, even outside of, from a security perspective, just to other elements within IT and their infrastructure. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, yes.
That's great. Yeah, so we're coming up on the end here. Any kind of final thoughts you want to wrap up with the tool here, or anything you want to leave the audience with before we sign off for today?
I think, as we walk through some of those kill chains, security is a process, and there's a lot of caveats along the way that we need to make sure that we get right, so that we can be and feel the safest that we can possibly be. Probably the biggest attack vector today is still mail, and we see most compromises or most impact to the company coming through mail. And the SIEM's a great place to get visibility into that, but you're always going to have to go outside of that to actually protect that source. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Mike, thanks for taking the time. Appreciate you walking us through this. And again, if you're watching, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at bitlyft.com and get in touch. And maybe you'll be seeing Mike on your own personalized demo. Thanks again, Mike, and everyone for joining in. Guys, have a great day.
All right. Thanks, everybody.